Today I'm going to be talking about Destiny for my final project. More specifically, Destiny 2, as that's the most recent release in the franchise. Destiny was first released in 2014, with the sequel Destiny 2 releasing late 2017. And hopefully, in this, I'm going to be talking about a specific mechanic that's in the game that they do a really good job tying it to um, the game mechanics as well as just the lore and how that intertwines. But before I get to that, I gotta explain a little bit about what Destiny is. So as far as the game goes, Destiny is a first-person shooter MMORPG, so a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. Some people call it a looter shooter, which essentially means you go around, you do activities and shoot bad guys, and it gives you loot, and you use that to level up your guardian, which are who you play, um, and you get more powerful that way. And it's kind of a cycle of that. Crash course of the narrative, which is important to know for what I'm going to be talking about. Like I mentioned, you play as a guardian. So in this story, it's a little bit into the future, and humanity is almost all but wiped out, except for the last city on Earth, which resides underneath the this being called the Traveler. The Traveler is a giant moon-sized being. It's like a spherical being that the humanity doesn't know too much about, but they do know that it is there to protect them, and that's why the last city is underneath it, in the shadow of it. So to help fight off the enemies that caused the um, all this death in humanity, which they'll be fighting back an enemy called the Darkness, which came a little bit before the Traveler arrived. The Darkness is kind of like a bunch of enemies, um, like aliens and just creatures who are their goal is to just wipe out humanity. So the Traveler created these little mechanical robots called ghosts, and these ghosts go out and seek out dead humans and revive them. And when they are revived, they come back to life, and they're filled with the Traveler's light, which is basically powers. They get abilities and powers that they can wield to use against the darkness. And so Guardians are what they're called. They guard humanity and defend them against the darkness. So that's a little bit of like a crash course. But the main thing I wanted to highlight um, is one of the key features of a Guardian is that because they've been revived before, if they die again, they can just be revived again. And so, in a sense, they're almost immortal. And Destiny does a very good job using that sort of narrative piece to explain a game mechanic within the game, which is being revived. Um, Throughout the game, no matter what activity that you're playing, you can die, but um, you can be revived, rather it be through teammates or just reviving yourself. And it's kind of explained with the narrative piece, which is the just being refilled with light and being reborn again, which is pretty cool. So basically, when you're playing like player versus player activities, or PvP, where you fight other guardians, um, it kind of in the lore when you're doing that, um, it's called in the Destiny world, it's called Crucible, which Crucibles in the lore is kind of a form of entertainment, um, but also kind of a way for guardians to compete and practice their skills. So they fight, and it's also entertaining to watch in that world. Um, but when you play the game, you are fighting other guardians, and you fight each other till you die, but you can be revived, and it kind of shows like a way that you can explain why they're fighting each other without it being a little, ridiculous. It's cool. They did a really good job tying that in there. Um, but another interesting way is in the PvE, where you actually fight against the darkness, and PvE stands for player versus enemy. And this is where Destiny really hones in on like tying the narrative structure or like the narrative piece of revives and like the light and the ghosts and stuff into a game mechanic. Which so um, when you're playing Destiny, there are harder activities where they have these things called darkness zones, where in darkness zones it's so like there's so much darkness and like enemies around that it snuffs out the light in your guardian. And so when you die for good and you can't be revived. Meaning in game, this translates to when you die, you have to restart the whole mission. So it's really challenging, and they do a good job with like making this a mechanic and turning something that is like a narrative piece into gameplay. Um, so, and of course, like anybody who braves the darkness, comes out on top, successfully completes the activity, they're rewarded with loot and um, gear and stuff that can be put on your Guardian. But it's a clever way to intertwine lore and gameplay into one piece, and I think Destiny does a good job at doing that. And not a lot of games are good at um, using like story to explain a gameplay piece like being revived. So that is part one. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was kind of how Destiny came to be. So Destiny was, like I mentioned before earlier, was headed by Bungie, which was a veteran studio who produced the Halo franchise, which was a industry-defining um, game series. They really honed in on the first-person shooter aspect with their first release, Halo Combat Evolved in 2001. And so it's no question why I think Destiny 2 has seen so much success when you have these veteran and hardened uh, developers who have the experience and talent to nail something down that is pretty magical. And what better way to, fund all that with a giant publisher like Activision who has loads of money and loads of cash. But the relationship between Bungie and Activision through the eye of the public was not always in the best light. Um, Activision has kind of been associated with several scummy microtransactions and general monetization practices in a couple games of the past. Um, so when people saw that Activision and Destiny were going to be together, some people were a little worried about what that might mean. And for the most part, I think everything was fine until Destiny released a form of loot boxes, um, which is a very much a frowned upon monetization strategy and is even being banned in some countries or in the process of trying to be banned. Because loot boxes are kind of seen as predatory, and you gotta think a lot of kids are playing this game, so it's pretty sad. But loot boxes, they're seen as a form of gambling. Um, Basically, players pay money to obtain in-game items that are chosen at random, almost like a lottery system. So when they released that, there was a lot of backlash. But when this happened, a lot of people actually put the blame not on Bungie, but on Activision. Um, and Bungie eventually changed the loot box system to a more forgiving system that made more sense and didn't require you to fork over cash to get everything. But the situation was pretty bad at the time. But if you fast forward to now, Bungie announced that in 2019, Bungie announced that they were splitting with Activision and that they would become their own publishers, which was a huge deal. A lot of people were excited and were ecstatic for like what that meant for the game as far as creative freedom, as well as just the monetization practices. People thought things would get cheaper and it wouldn't be as toxic or predatory as they were in the past. However, fast forward to now, They announced a new system not too long ago, I think about a month ago or 2 months ago, um, called Transmog, which allows you to skin over armor pieces onto like more powerful armor. So you can keep the stats of the armor that is powerful, but make it look like a different piece of armor. And a lot of games do this, but usually it's pretty fair, um, fairly priced and whatnot. But unfortunately, in this case, it is not. A lot of the public is pretty outraged right now towards Bungie, as they're making it almost the only way to get them really is to fork over cash. I think they have one or two ways to get some in game to be able to do this, but for the most part, you have to pay real money, which is a shame. Um, but I think the way I see it um, is it's easy to point fingers and blame uh, Bungie or Activision or whatever, but Bungie did they'd made Destiny a free-to-play game recently, and free-to-play games need to make money somehow. And so, thankfully, the transmog system doesn't really affect the game that much. It's more so a cosmetic feature. So Bungie monetizes it by, um, you have to pay money for it, and that money goes directly to the game to help them keep putting out content and stuff for the game because it's free. Um, so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Um, it's a little unfortunate, but I think people forget that we're not really paying for the game like we used to, um, because it's free to play. So I think that was an interesting thing. But this kind of leads me into the last point, which was I want to talk about the social aspect of Destiny, kind of move away from the industry side. So for the third and final part, I wanted to kind of discuss and talk about is the social aspect of Destiny, um, and how much of an impact it's made on a lot of people, whether it's their lives or just having fun, and what good that it's done. I think, regardless of the argument of if the monetization is bad or good, the relationship that you build with your player base as a developer, is one of the most important roles, with such a socially oriented game like Destiny. But thankfully, Bungie is no stranger to this. They communicate to their player base every week through something called This Week at Bungie, or what a lot of people refer to it as the TWAB. Um, Bungie in this kind of they'll discuss like announcements, they'll discuss news, any future content that's coming out, and inside looks into the dev team or what they're working on. But what's really cool, aside from that side of it, is you get to also get a look at the community side of things. And Bungie is very pro community. They love fostering these smaller communities and spotlighting them for people, uh, to get exposed to different things. So every week they have a little section at the bottom of their post where they talk about like new things coming out, um, called uh, Movie of the Week, and this is a really cool way for people they submit. So they submit their own submissions. They play the game and record themselves. Rather, this is them actually making like a little mini movie or like a skit or montage or something, or it's just something that, something crazy that happened in game. Um, they can submit it for a chance to be highlighted. And it's a cool relationship where it seems like Bungie cares enough to look into and highlight things that their community is doing. And I think that's a really special way to kind of build a relationship between the player and the company. So you can see somebody made a video there and they got a highlight, and another person, looks like it was the winner, got another little video. But they also spotlight artists. This is a cool way if you're an artist and you like the game. Um, there's always some really cool art from the community being posted here, and Bungie really cares. I mean, look at that. It's really, really, really detailed. Wow. It's really cool though that they care enough to uh, kind of look into this and focus in on the community and kind of build that relationship up. Um, Another thing that they did that they've been doing is they do charity drives. Um, One of the big ones that Bungie did was back in 2015, um, after the Nepal earthquake that killed around 8,000 people. Bungie released an in-game emblem that if you bought with real money, the proceeds from that went to a relief fund for Nepal. And they raised over like $1 million for that, which was really powerful. I thought that was cool. And that Nepal's not the only one they've done. They've done many ones in the past, even for like the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff like that, which is really cool to see a game company reach out towards other things that matter. It's not just about the game, but the people who play them. And I think that's really cool for them to do that. Um, but they also have smaller communities that have spawned from playing the game. Like the two main modes in Destiny are PvE content, so player versus enemy content, and PvP content, which is player versus player content. And there's people who play both. I myself play both. But there's also people who kind of just stick to one or the other, which has fostered some, communities in each side. And there's um, there's speedrunning communities who only play PvE, and they race against each other, um, see like who the fastest is. And there's PvP communities like clans have spawned, and so people have, they build their clans up and they even market them. And some of the clans are seen as like top dogs. There's a PvP clan called Primal, who's dedicated to just PvP, and anybody who's in there is usually just top of the line, really good at the game. Um, and their recruitment is super limited. So if you ever see someone, usually they're pretty famous in the community, which is pretty cool that you have like these almost like celebrities in game, um, which is awesome. But I think it's those kind of offshoots that make Destiny such a cool game, that you have these small communities growing and stuff, um, but they all play the same game. They're all in the same game, enjoying Destiny, um, and it makes it a really amazing place for people to come and hang out and play together. Um, and something that Bungie's even done, since it's such a socially oriented game, not everybody has friends who play Destiny. So something they did was create something called um, LFG, or which stands for Looking For Group, um, which you go in here and you can kind of look and find these forum posts saying like, hey, I need this guy for this activity. Um, and if you're interested, then shoot me a message and we'll link up and play the activity, which is cool because it actually spawns a lot of new friendships with people that you wouldn't have met or talked to before, but it's through the medium of Destiny. And I find that a lot of people who are usually a little more antisocial or shy can really bloom and just kind of be themselves in this platform where they otherwise couldn't. And they have, easier time talking to people because the ice is already broken. You know that you both have something in common, which is you like Destiny. And so you meet new people and you play together and you have fun and you make new friends. And it's something magical that a lot of games you miss out on, rather because it's too competitive or whatever it may be, where Destiny's community really just fosters new relationships and helps each other grow, and you can have fun while you're doing it. And I think that's something really special about that. And to me, that's what Destiny is. Rather, it's the toxic microtransactions that you want to dwell on, or if you want to look at the positive side of what it's done for charity or community and building friendships while being a really intuitive game, where there's depth in the story and the gameplay with the revive mechanics that I talked about earlier. And that is where I think I'm going to conclude this. Thank you for watching.